Hello everybody and welcome. We have a little bit of a treat for you today. We are going to a speakeasy. But not just any speakeasy. We're going back in time. Follow me. Like I said, speakeasy. We are back in time, basically in 1930 here today, in a basement. And you're going, yeah, speakeasy, it's in a basement, of course. It's not just any basement. This is a residential basement. This is a passion project by our friend, Mr. Rich Roberts. And we are going to take a look and learn about everything in this wonderful bar here. So why don't you follow me and let's go take a look.
Thank you for inviting us to your speakeasy.
Sure.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Good to see you, Ryan.
Good to see you as well.
So, Rich, first of all, I want to really tell our audiences about you and who you are. But first, we have a very long relationship. We're very good friends.
Right.
I'm presuming. Yes. And we've known each other now for how long?
About 22 years.
22 years.
Yeah.
And I actually remember the first day we met. It was in downtown Detroit.
It was.
It was in a very old building too, if I remember.
It
Yeah.
was.
And we've worked together in multiple places.
That's right.
So why don't you tell our friends and our audiences a little bit about yourself, and then to what led to this passion bar?
Well, okay, so for my day job, so to speak, I've been working in the IT industry for over 30 years, but Detroit history is one of my passions. And the bar that you see here is actually in my parents' basement. They bought a house not too far from here in Dearborn Heights, and when they bought that house in 1967, this bar was in the basement. It had been salvaged about 1965 or thereabouts. It wasn't all working. Right now I've got the refrigeration units are working, but it was there. Now when my parents passed away, my brother and I had every intention of just selling the bar with the house. But the people who bought the house didn't want the bar. They didn't have an interest in it. So my brother didn't have an interest in it. So I said, well, I can't just let the bar just be thrown away. I had to take it. So when I took it, and this was about 7 years or so ago, I knew that I wanted to not just put it in the basement, but I really wanted to do something special. So, 7 years ago, there was nothing here. Everything that you see from the floor to the ceiling, the walls, everything has been completely redone to try to invoke a period of about 1930.
Yeah.
The bar dates to 1930, 1933, and yes, it may have existed during Prohibition, we think. I worked with a Detroit historian to try to find out where it may have come from, but we did find out some clues. We know that, for instance, this was not in a restaurant at the time. And he said one of the telltale signs to know is the fact that on these cases here, there was no evidence of any locking device that you would have had if this would have been in a restaurant. And what else did he say? The other interesting thing is that this was you stood at this bar.
Yes.
The bar is 45 inches tall. A standard bar stool is 30 inches. If I brought a standard bar stool down, you'd be real low. You would be too low. So in order to make it seem reasonable, I had extra tall bar stools and had those specially made so that you're standing at the right level of the bar. But originally, you just stood at this bar. But one of the other things that the historian told me was that he said it was actually quite a special bar, and one of the reasons is these Deco-influenced cases. He said, this would have held your expensive whiskey at the time. Things like your Napoleon brandy and that sort of high-end whiskeys and liquors.
Yes.
And if anybody has ever worked in a bar, you know that you can't be running and putting things on a glass shelf, you know, because you're going to break stuff. You're in a busy situation. So these were probably used a few times in the night, you know. But the interesting thing is that, you know, the time this would have existed would have been during the Depression. And, you know, the people that were coming here where you had fancy whiskeys and liquors were the wealthy. These were the titans of industry. These were people like the gangsters and the Purple Gang existed, right? That's who would have been sitting at this bar.
I have to ask you, because the first thing that caught my eye, oddly enough, and I don't know if we caught it in the shot, is this beautiful ceiling that we have here.
I put this ceiling in myself about 1.5 years ago.
Yeah.
I, again, worked with a Detroit historian. We picked out the pattern. There's a company in Florida that makes the original tin components for this.
Yes.
And I had a whole bunch of tin drop shipped to my house, and I carried them down here, and I installed this myself.
Wow.
So now the color, you might think that the color is atypical of the time, but in fact, at the 666 nightclub in Detroit on Adams Street that existed back in the 30s, had a red ceiling, very similar to this. So this is of the time. This harkens back to the time of Deco. It goes with the bar. If you would have gone to France back in, you know, the time right before World War I, this is kind of the look that you would have got from that.
It seems like you really did your homework with this place. I mean, it is, everywhere you look, you know, you see something that would have existed back in 1930. I have to ask as well about those, I believe, seltzer bottles over there, correct?
Yeah, over here against the wall. These are seltzer bottles. Again, these are French, again, from, you know, the time period, but it runs the gamut from about 1875 to 1885, 1890, 1900, 1925. These are all different styles. If anyone is a fan of, say, some of the old Victorian novels, or they make reference to the Gassagee. And I thought about getting this working once. In fact, I got it to work, and then I had second thoughts, because the porcelain is perfect, the cane is perfect. I wouldn't want something to happen to it.
Right.
The reason why they're this shape is because when you mix tartaric acid with your base, your soda, these can crack if they're not wrapped. The same with the big one here, and even this one here. That's why they're wrapped that way. It's to keep them from shattering.
Right. Looking more at the bar here, that cash register, front and center right there, that is a beautiful piece right there. You know, do you think you could tell me a bit about that?
Sure, that dates to 1909. That would have been in a bar from 1930. They would have had a cash register like that. You know, it was a little bit older, but that's common.
Yeah.
There's a cash register. I have a picture of my great-great-uncle, who was a proprietor at a bar in Detroit about in 1910, 1912 time frame. And he has a cash register very similar to that. So that was kind of an interesting thing. So it is working, and it kind of adds to the ambience.
It certainly adds to the ambiance. You mentioned, was it your great-uncle, your great-great-uncle, correct?
My great-great-uncle was in a bar, was a proprietor at a bar in Detroit.
Would you mind telling us a bit about him?
Well, from what I know, I do know that in 1900 he was a carriage maker. So he built the insides of carriages before the automobile, came on the scene, became popular. And sometime after 1907, he became the proprietor of the Joe Massisick Bar in Detroit, which would have been located just north of Ford Field. There's just a field there now where this is. There's no building there anymore, but I do have pictures of him at his place. It was an original Stroh's bar, they called it, where Stroh's would front money, and if you kept these Stroh's advertising in the window, you'd run your bar, and of course you only had Stroh's beer as the beer there. I don't know what all the covenants were at that time, but it was a Stroh's bar. And he, of course, I think he was probably there from sometime after 1907 to right up till when Prohibition started in Michigan, which was 1918. So we were 2 years before national prohibition went into effect.
Wow. So another thing that I'm taking a look at here is some of these bottles along the top of the bar there. I mean, the ones that look so ornate with the model heads and such.
Yeah. So this again, this is a. I'll set that one down here. This is French. This dates to it. The oldest, or I should say the youngest, I guess it could be, would be 1920. They stopped making these in 1920. This is a cobalt. The sizes in France they called them demis. If this was in New York, they'd call it a send-up. And that's what they would use in the hotels. Somebody wants seltzer, send it up. This was what they would get, because the larger bottles were actually quite heavy. And once they're filled with seltzer water, these weigh several pounds, and trying to balance that on your tray, they would have the little one instead.
Yeah. So that'd be quite an ordeal trying to take that up, to a hotel room or something,
Right.
balancing it and trying to carry it.
Right.
So I can see why they would do that. It's very cool, though.
Yeah.
So some of these pieces, I mean, you mentioned before that it's very hard to find in the U.S. How did you source?
These were sourced from the Netherlands.
Oh.
There's a woman there that has her father collected them, and so she has a lot of history on them, and that's how I know that they stopped making cobalt seltzer bottles in 1920.
Right.
She's the expert. She told me.
Yeah.
But some of these others that are very, very difficult to find, because most of them were reused, and so they would get banged up.
Yeah.
And in comparison, I have now this one isn't too bad, but this is a Detroit bottle here. So this is what we had in Detroit, and I believe this company finally went out of business about 1975.
Wow.
But this is, I think, probably from the 1930s.
Gorgeous.
The other thing to mention, too, is most of the glass at that time came from Czechoslovakia.
Huh.
And after World War II, it was harder to source this glass because the glassworks were destroyed. They were bombed in World War II.
Yes. Wow. So
So-
these are really unique pieces. That seeing as,
Yeah,
they don't make them like this anymore, as you might
right.
say.
There's one place left in Brooklyn that still refill these old bottles.
Really?
And if you're in the neighborhood, they will deliver you 10 bottles every month of your seltzer.
Huh.
And they've got a waiting list now, because now it's become more of a novelty.
Yeah.
But at one time there were hundreds of seltzer men in and around the New York area, and other cities too. Detroit had them, obviously. We have a Detroit bottle here.
Right.
But there's only one left that I know of that actually uses the old bottles.
Wow. That's good to know. I mean, hey, if any of you watching, want to refill your seltzer bottle, or I guess get one yourself, you know where to go. New York City, right?
New York Seltzer Boys in Brooklyn, I believe, is the name of the company.
I have to take out a trip out to Brooklyn to get some for you.
Yeah, I could take these, and they would clean them and refill them.
Oh, that is so cool. That is really, really cool.
Yeah.
It's just nice to know that a remnant of that survives today.
Yeah, there's still a remnant that's still going.
That's so cool. So some of the other things I'm looking at up there, the sherry bottle and your apple and rye and all that, those with the model heads on top.
Yeah, these date to about 1890.
Oh.
These are hand blown. This would have been, what they would have used back there. A lot of these were reused. Of
Yes.
course, they had a big barrel in the back, and they would refill these guys.
Yeah.
The stopper, of course, these are just novelties. These were made by an Italian company, and they date to probably the 1930s. Some
Yeah.
of them are 1940s, and they're all hand carved. And you can see
Take a look at
they're
that.
quite detailed.
Take a look at that. They're gorgeously carved. I mean, very, very detailed. And for a piece from that long ago, remarkably well preserved as well.
Yeah, I thought when I first got it that it was like a repop, where it was made out of resin, but
Right.
it's not. It's actually from the period where they carved them by hand.
Wow.
And the other interesting thing is I got another one just like it, and it's slightly different, and you can tell that they're slightly different.
Let's hold them up to the camera.
So they're not exactly the same. They're close, but if you look at the cheekbones or look at the eyes, they're close, but they're not the same.
They're not quite the same. They're just a little bit different. I'm noticing that even the color on the brim or on the band on the hat is just a tiny bit different.
Yeah. So if they were exactly the same, like made out of resin, they'd be indistinguishable.
They'd be copies, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a testament that they were most certainly handmade back
Yeah,
in the day.
exactly.
That is amazing. And these bottles, I mean, you don't see anything like this anymore. I mean, I'm going to be honest. You go into a bar today, you're not going to see something like this. So this is such a cool piece to have.
Yeah, they were all handmade, and that lettering was applied after.
Wow, that is such a cool piece. I mean, not only of art but of history, and
Right.
It just adds to the ambiance, like everything else in this place. That is awesome.
And there's other little things up here too. I've got shot glasses that date to 1900 that they used to give away free.
Huh.
If the bar would order so much whiskey, then they would give them the little free shot glasses.
Yeah. Well, that's cool.
And they expected those to be thrown away, but people kept them. People liked them.
Yeah.
So they keep them. They're very fragile. They're very thin.
Mm-hmm.
And every once in a while, I can go to an antique store and I will find them mixed in with the new ones, right?
Huh.
Because they don't know
Yeah.
what they are.
They don't know
Now
how
most,
old they are.
now most places know, but every once in a while you'll find it where they'll mix one in with the new place from the Hard Rock Cafe, and you find one that's 100 years old. And if you know what you're looking for, it's, again, you can find them still.
It's a good find. I mean, you're just sitting there thumbing through some of the the newer ones, Hard Rock Cafe, Oh, wow, 100-year-old shot glass.
Right.
You're like, I'll take this one, please.
This is wintergreen. This is, it would have been a, after dinner drink, like a creme de menthe.
Yeah.
They had creme de menthe back there. In fact, my great uncle has a picture. I have a picture of him in his bar, and he's got creme de menthe.
Yeah.
And this was only $20.
$20.
And this is hand blown.
It's gorgeously made hand-blown glass with that, of course, the lettering.
It's 120 years old.
120 years old, and it's a piece in beautiful condition too.
Yeah, and it's got little flaws in the glass. You can see little bubbles.
Yeah, but
Now I put this top in, so it didn't have a top, but it would have had a cork in it.
yeah, a cork stopper of some sort.
Yeah.
The little bubbles and all that just makes you know that it was handmade,
Right.
though. Factory-made stuff like we see today, of course, is going to be perfect, obviously, because it's made by machine. But hand-blown stuff, much like the carved toppers that we talked about earlier, are going to have those little imperfections.
Right, little imperfections
That make-
you know that it was old.
Yeah, it's old and it's handmade, hand-blown. I mean, that's amazing. These pieces, I mean, they're museum-quality pieces, obviously, I'd say. Having worked in a
Yeah.
museum, I'd say they're museum quality.
I mean, I think depending on what if you were looking for a display of barware at that time,
Yeah.
it definitely would be the real thing, and you'd want to include it.
Oh yeah, I mean, especially as we mentioned these wonderful seltzer bottles, which I can't get enough of because, again, as you mentioned, anything that you find nowadays is going to be used and stuffed up, but these are just.
This is actually my nicest one right here.
Yeah.
I didn't even show you this one.
Let's take a look at it.
This is what they call. This is a Marquis style or a Mae West
Yeah.
style.
Yeah,
Okay, so this is flawless.
it's gorgeous. Look at that blue.
Yeah.
That is just beautiful.
Both of these, I think, would glow under a black light.
Wow.
So they've got a tiny bit of uranium in them. tiny bit.
Imagine that. Oh man, they certainly don't do that
They call
anymore.
them a uranium glass.
Uranium glass.
I haven't tested this one, but she said it would glow under a black light.
Bring my Geiger counter next time.
Yeah, you could.
Right.
You could.
Now I gotta ask about this. Was it a player piano? I think you mentioned.
Yeah, this was also in my parents' basement. This needed to be restored. I had it restored by a person in Plymouth, Michigan, and he brought it back to original condition. I didn't want it to look, brand new out of the showroom. I wanted it to look nice, but not perfect.
Yes.
Right? Because I didn't want it to be, as I say, too nice. The bench here, the original bench broke, and it couldn't be repaired, so that's actually a replacement. And it's a little bit different. I haven't refinished this to match, but it's pretty close. Your eye doesn't really go to it too much, but that's another thing on the list to do.
Right. So much like some of the previous projects we've taken a look at, this is of course a living project as well. You're continually working on this.
Work on it. I should mention the wall here too.
Yes.
This wall I had installed a few years ago. These bricks were reclaimed bricks from Detroit.
Wow.
Those bricks are originally made by the Jacob Daniel Brick Company.
Wow.
They were a company that existed in Detroit. They had several locations. They existed from the time of the Civil War up until about 1953. And these particular bricks came from an apartment complex. We don't know where, but we were told that it was made about 1920. So they're about 100 years old.
Wow.
Roughly.
A piece of Detroit history, even in the wall here.
Yeah, now I had, when he installed the bricks, I made sure that he buffered the mortar so that it was darker in areas, and so it looked old. Because otherwise it would all look like this. It would all look real bright. And I wanted a little bit of brightness to show you, let's say we'll pretend we did a repair here, so it actually looks like an old wall.
Right.
I didn't want it to look perfect, I wanted it to look old.
That's the attention to detail,
Right.
If it looks too perfect, too new, it'll seem, fake. But if you add those little details like, well, I guess, weathered some wear, it makes you feel like you're really back in time.
Now, I had a person that had looked at it and remembered the basement from old and couldn't imagine that I had a brick wall. And the person thought it was wallpaper up there.
You're kidding.
Yeah. Where'd you get the wallpaper? It's like, wallpaper?
No, that's real life brick, That is so cool. So, over there as well, I see you have some, some music for the player piano?
Yeah, right? Those are piano rolls. Most of those are 100 years old. Some of the newer ones over there on the right-hand side, those are from the 60s.
Oh.
But my brother and I used to play this a lot because, back in the 60s and early 70s, we didn't have air conditioning in the house.
Yeah.
So the basement was the coolest place.
Right.
So we would come down here with the neighborhood kids and we would play these old piano rolls all afternoon. And we got a great workout. My parents knew exactly where we are because they could hear us, right? And we played them all afternoon, and it was great.
That is great. So you got family memories attached to this piece, for sure.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So some of these statues that sit on top of that.
So that's chalkware. Those date to about 1970, and I put them down here because they kind of go with the period, right? The people like we have Louis Armstrong right here. He was at his peak in the 1930s.
Yeah.
We had down here. I'm drawing a blank.
Was it Laurel and Hardy down there?
Laurel and Hardy, and then we've got over here. We've got. I'm drawing a blank on here. This guy too.
Fields. Yes.
W.C. Fields.
W.C.
Yeah,
Fields.
it's like I can't imagine. Yeah. So again, they kind of fit the period. That's why they're here. I think they're kind of cool.
They are cool.
So then on this wall here, I just have again things from the period, right? You've got an old whiskey jug from a place in Detroit that existed. Wow. This dates to about 1904.
Come take a look at that. It's a great piece.
Right, so I've got a few people from the jazz age too. People like Lena Horne here, Paul Robeson. We've got let's see, Marian Anderson up here, and then this is Lionel Hampton. Yeah.
So you got sort of a who's who of jazz up here on this wall right now, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. So this is an old, crusty old picture I found. This is Jack Johnson, 1915, with his white wife at the time.
Wow.
You know, and they were going on a cruise, I think, at the time. Now, of course, this is an original picture. I just found this very, rustic-looking picture in an antique shop, and I thought it was neat, so I bought it.
Right.
I'd love to find a better picture of them, like an original photo of that time, but I haven't been able to locate it.
It fits the ambiance still, though.
Yeah, but I thought that was really interesting.
That's very cool. I love the posters and the decoration. all around.
So this here, this is all sheet music. This belonged to my great uncle,
Huh.
and so and you can, they're just attached with a clear little connection here in the corners. So the music is, you could take it out of the frame if you need to,
Right.
If you wanted to play it, for instance, so it's
Yes.
still intact. But yeah, that's all sheet music there.
It's gorgeous. Let's talk about this pool table a little bit. This I mean this
So
just
this is an old house and pool table. The style, I think would probably be characterized as Victorian or Empire style. This could have been a similar type of style that you would have had back in the 30s, because it's a very popular style, for the last 100 and some years.
right.
This style goes back to the late 1800s,
Right.
something similar to that. But no, the pool table itself isn't an antique.
Take a look at some of those pool balls up there on the wall. as
Okay,
well.
so those are billiard balls that date from the 1890s.
Wow.
I bought those from an expert who knew what they were. You have to be careful if you go online, because many times people will mix pool balls together. They didn't come from the same set, and they were all hand painted at that time. So the way the four is painted, it doesn't look like the way that the other balls are painted. So you don't unless you're an expert, you're not going to know if that 4 ball actually went with that set.
Huh.
But those are called clay balls, although they weren't. They were really made out of a composite material, and I believe the brand is Hyatt Fancy O. Hyatt made billiard balls for Brunswick, and I believe that's what he told me that those were.
We'll see a lot of these really nice old photos. Looks like some school certificates as well.
Yeah, most of those belong to my grandfather. My grandfather started working at Ford Motor Company in 1920.
Wow.
And Ford paid for his education. So he started there in 1920 on the drafting table, and then graduated from U of D in 1924 with an engineering degree.
Yes. I'm loving this stuff. I mean, this is, of course, personal family history here, and it's just full of, Detroit history at that.
Right.
I mean, look at that, certificate of admission to the Detroit high school.
Yeah, I actually have some of his old receipts from some of the cars that he had. He had a 32 Ford, and you can tell that it was interesting, what was extra on the car at the time, right?
Yeah.
So if you wanted a tire lock, or if you wanted bumpers were extra back then, right? So imagine, buying a car without bumpers.
Wow. Come take a look at the certificate, Derek. I want to point out the pricing on that. $15 extra for the bumper. And, of course, $450 for the car,
Yeah, there's another one up there at the top.
Right there.
No, it's
over here. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
over there.
You can see this one's a little bit more expensive. We got a $495 car. And wipers were extra, $450.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's a steal.
That's great.
Now, he retired in 1966, and there was his like a little retirement memento that people signed.
Yes.
And the interesting thing about that was people that know about Ford history know that in 1945 the Whiz Kids joined the Ford Motor Company, and they were 10. They became engineers from the military, and Ben Mills and Charlie Bosworth both signed that document, and they were 2 of the Whiz Kids.
Wow.
And there's Ed Lundy Drive behind over there behind one of the Ford buildings.
Yes.
He was one of the Whiz Kids.
Wow. And his name's on that retirement
Yeah.
sheet. That's so cool. That's really awesome.
Well, Ed Lundy's isn't on there, but he knew Ed Lundy. He
Yeah.
knew McNamara, who was the president of Ford at the time, back in the early 60s, and then went to work for JFK in the White House.
That's right, yeah. Very famous.
Controversial person, but yeah, he was one of the whiz kids as well.
Wow.
So here's a couple of other kind of interesting photos. These were from some old, some bars in Hamtramck. We think this dates to about, the late 40s or so, and same here.
Huh. They're having a grand old time, you can tell.
Yeah. And you can tell by, the type of tie that they had, the real short tie. That was kind of the style back in the late 40s.
Right, of course. And this this, I don't know, just makes you feel like you're in a real space. I know I've said that before, but it makes you feel like you've stepped back in time, that these might have been patrons that you might see in here tomorrow or something like that,
Yeah.
So what other pieces do we have here? That's that telephone over there. That's certainly something very interesting.
Yeah, that dates to about 1911.
Wow. Take a look at that. I'm sure most of our audience has probably never seen one of these live before,
So back in the day, before electricity, right, you had a magneto in here, and when you rang this, it would create a charge. And then it would wake up the operator. That would be, where the operator is, and you would be able to lift this, and you would be able to place a call to New York City.
You take a look at that. You only see this sort of stuff in movies from the period now, but to actually see one in person, it's something else. I mean,
Now this one I don't have hooked up.
Right.
I think I could get it so that I could place a call out. I wouldn't be able to get a call in unless I completely redid the insides. Now, sometimes people do that. Well, they will make it into a functioning new type of a phone.
right?
But I don't want to.
No, you don't want to
Hurt
mess
it.
with the guts. Yeah.
Right.
Man, this is very cool.
And this was interesting up here too. This photograph. These are some of the folks that would have actually built this.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
This phone here.
Yeah.
So I think that they had a conference back in the early 1920s. So I thought that was kind of an interesting piece that went with this.
Wow. I love the little addition of this booth over here as well.
Yeah, the booth is actually new.
Yeah.
So this, but it's from the style of the period, because you have in the 50s this would have been squared off, but here it's rounded, and you can see the chairs are also rounded. See how it's scooped? So this and this back piece here dates to the 1920s. Actually, it's actually quite a bit older. But so this is more of a deco flavor.
Yes.
And you can see the billeting here matches what's in the bar. Now the billeting in the bar is pretty beat up, but it's a similar type of billeting.
You can almost imagine, just looking at that bar over there, you blink your eyes, you can imagine seeing some guy with a cigar or a cigarette leaning over, with a whiskey or something like that.
Oh yeah.
With one of those hats, one of those fedoras on or something like that, just like in the old movies. I mean, it's just amazing to see it in person.
Yeah, one of the Purple Gang wanting his cut for the week.
Yeah, he wants his money, right?
Right. So he's gonna wait over there.
Yeah.
Where the waitress would come and bring back the empty glasses.
Right.
And she'd set him there, and he'd want his cut.
He wants his cut. That's how it works, and especially during Prohibition era when you're running this.
Or even like 1933, 34. This was the height of the Depression. This was a fancy place.
Yeah.
Right. This was not for the common man. This was not for the guy to get a 5-cent beer.
No.
This was a place to get expensive booze, to be away from the riffraff. This was a special place.
Exclusive in many ways.
So that's what makes that bar so special, because there's very few of them left from that period. Now there are older bars than this in Detroit. There's the Two-Way. There's other examples of bars that are probably closer to where my great uncle worked.
Yeah.
Where they have the bar top that's made out of American. It's not hickory. It's American chestnut. which the trees they no longer exist because we've experienced the Emerald Ash Borer about 15 years ago here in our area. Well, back around 1900, 1905, those particular trees, were wiped out by another disease that came through.
Those who know your history will know about that.
And here's another thing I didn't point out to you: the bar top.
Yes.
Now, this is an interesting thing because you look at it and you say, "Oh, well, this is Formica. Who wants Formica?" But this came out in 1927.
Huh.
This was a big deal. I mean, now we thumb our nose at this, right? We say, "Oh, Formica. I want original wood, or I want something granite, or some other fancier top, right?" But in 1927, this was a big deal.
This is the next big thing in 1927,
And that's another way how we can, we know how we're trying to zero in on how old this bar is, because it had to be after that. So that's why we maybe 1930, 1933, somewhere in that time frame.
Helps to date the the piece that you got here. I mean, that's a good point to make, because in the modern day, and I think a lot of people might have this misconception, if you're going to look at a 30s bar, you're going to figure, oh, it's going to be wood, it's going to be this bar. I mean, Formica being that next big thing, if you're a fancy place.
That was the big thing. Another thing I should point out too, when I was restoring this bar, is I was missing 3 handles.
Huh.
3 handles.
Yes.
I think, where am I going to get 3 handles? So I took one of them off and I looked at the back and it said Polar on it. And so I looked online, and the Polar manufacturing company that made these is still in operation in Chicago. They have been in operation since 1918, and there was a part number on these, and believe it or not, they still made those particular, the same part number even. So I was able to order 3, and they're exactly the same.
Wow.
And they've been making these handles and these hinges for 100 years, and they haven't changed them at all.
What a lucky break that they're still making it.
Wasn't that amazing?
That's amazing.
Clearly, if it wasn't for the internet, I'd be out of luck.
Right. Yeah. I mean, how would you ever find without the internet? Right. That's amazing. I mean, that company being still in business, making those exact handles. I mean, that's
with the same part number.
Right, with the same part number. Right. You imagine getting an order for that, like, oh man.
Well, but they still use them today.
It's true.
I mean, in any kind of, like, you've got the ice cream man. How they open up the back, and they've got the fancy handle. These are those handles.
Well, there you go. Man.
So they still use them today. But again, it's something that's one of those few things that they still make that are 100 years old. And they've never changed them.
So I have to ask, because we didn't get into this earlier, how did you begin? How did you get into this this project?
That was the bar, right? Yeah. So I wanted to make it. I wanted to make an area that was true to the bar, a proper setting for it. Yeah. I didn't want to have a setting that was just, it's in the basement, and you got a acoustic tile ceiling, and you got, I wanted to make it. And it was a little bit gradual. Now it's only been 7 years,
Really?
But every year and sometimes I would paint the walls, and we started. Actually, when I started with blue walls and white trim, and it looked fine. It's a basement, right?
Yeah.
But I looked at it and said, well, that's not really true to the style. The color is wrong.
Yeah.
The white trim is wrong. So I had a guy that was a very talented person. He's a contractor. He did all of this handwork here to make that to stain this and to get that sheen the way it is, to make it look period. He did the door over here and the closet door. All of that is from. It's new, but it's. Again, the door handles, right?
Yeah.
The door handles are old.
It's accurate to the period, all of it.
Accurate to the period.
Very, very cool.
The colors on the walls now are accurate to the period. This is a gray. This is a very, very dark gray, and this is what you would have seen.
Makes sense. Yeah. It's beautiful, and Very, very historically accurate, obviously. Again,
The floor is actually accurate. Now, this would have been a type of linoleum. This is a floating floor. It's not. But the historian says, yeah, that was, he told me that this is accurate enough for the period.
makes sense.
So the general look of it, you can get into, well, it's not this or that. And of course, the lights obviously are modern lights.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to try to duplicate what they had back then. Generally, they would have had some type of a chandelier hanging with a bunch of wires going every which way, and it would have been a fire atmosphere. But that's what they had. If you looked at some of the old bar pictures and any kind of lighting at all, it was a disaster.
It's a mess, absolute mess. Yeah, I mean it's for safety reasons and all that, and we do the same thing. In Greenfield Village, I can attest. You got to make some allowances. Modern lights, modern electrical fixtures.
Right, and certain things I had to try to work around and be creative around. Like you'll notice where the sticks here are. Well, and you think, well, why did I do this? Well, there's pipes all here sticking out. So I had pipes sticking out here. I had pipes sticking out here. So what do? We box them in and we make it look like that, right?
Right.
The same thing over here with these little tables. Well,
Yes.
I've got poles, right, in the basement. What am I going to do with these poles? So I did that myself.
Ooh.
I built a little table around there, and I also made sure that this was rubbed to make it look like it had been worn.
That's a great detail. A wonderful detail. Again, the small attention to detail is what really makes it, pop.
But I again, it was a couple of years ago during the pandemic. I built those little tables.
Yeah.
I made it, and I didn't want to box it to make it look too boxy. I wanted it to make it look more interesting. So I put this around it. It's like a fabric backed, thing where you have the wood, then you can stain the wood, and then you can wrap it around the pole. So it looked interesting.
It's gorgeous. Again, you can imagine somebody sitting here, ashtray or something like that with a cigarette and just having their whiskey for the day, and I can almost smell, hear, feel it around me. I can imagine the player piano going. I can imagine conversations happening. It's fully immersive, I think.
Yeah.
It's just this is an amazing piece. This entire thing's an amazing place.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I gotta thank you so much for having us over and for talking to us about this wonderful project that you have here.
Well, you're welcome, Ryan. Anytime.
Well, thank you very much.
Glad that you were able to come.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gents, what a find. I'm just saying, what a find. So, thank you all. Thank you all for joining us today. We hope that you enjoyed this sort of video, and we'd like to do more of this. So if you guys have any suggestions on places you know about, shoot me an email, lunchkingdetroit@gmail.com. Otherwise, if you liked it, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more. Signing off.